poems all that well. And maybe you can give us a little bit of background into James Joyce's familiarity with music, and maybe that's why it leapt off the page for you. But one of these poems he did set to music, right? He did sing, right? This was a bit ado to girlish ways or days or something to that effect. Upon the first couple of readings that I did of these things, I found them to be kind of thin and unimpressive. And then I sort of developed my own interpretation that made them jump out to me in a religious way. But we don't necessarily have to talk about that. But what's interesting to me was, like, you know, I think his intention was for all these to be set to music, and it seems like he was waiting for you to do it almost. So I'm just kind of curious if you could maybe explain to people what Joyce's background was with music. I know he sang. I think people said that he had a nice tenor voice. I know he had an interest maybe in lutes or something like that. You could correct me if I'm wrong. But what his familiarity was with music was, and maybe how that led to him intentionally structuring the poems in such a way that someone like you would pick up on it.
And his musical background is really interesting. And so he wrote these poems between 1901 and 1904, roughly. And during that time, he was very interested in Elizabethan music. We've got various bits of evidence for that. In fact, in 1904, I believe, I'm looking over at my notes here, sorry.
That's fine.
Sorry, everyone. In my masses of notes on him. So he entered a competition. He entered, like, the kind of singing competition. It's and I have to admit, I find a lot of the details of Joyce's life at this time quite amusing. So he entered this singing competition, and he came third. There we go, 1901. A friend of his convinced him to do it. In fact, there's a fun limerick written by Gogarty, which was somebody he lived with, which begins, "There is a young fellow named Joyce who possesses a sweet tenor voice." So he was a tenor, and he entered this very famous music competition. It's still going on now, but it began in 1896. And there's from the 17th of May that year, there is a review of his performance in the Irish Daily Independent, which says, "Mr. Joyce showed himself possessed of the finest quality voice of any of those competing." So he was a wonderful tenor. And I think at this point in his life, he could have gone in either direction, really, whether singing or literature would be it. He didn't win because he couldn't read music very well, funnily enough. And so he failed the sight reading test by walking off stage.
No, I did hear that, yeah.
Not even competing in it. So he gets given the bronze medal. This is slightly off topic of his background, but it's quite an insight into his character, even at that he tells his friend Gogarty, who wrote the limerick, that he'd thrown the medal in the River Liffey because it wasn't suitable for barter, and he was only interested in the medal for its financial value. But he lied. He kept it, and he gave it to his aunt, and it's now owned by the dancer Michael Flatley, Riverdance. It's just interesting. It's that little story for me supports a lot of the feeling I have about this, which is that Joyce, he really did want to appear as a very cool person, I don't mean cool as in hip. I mean cool as in not emotional. He didn't want to come across as sentimental, this sort of quite typical sort of Irish sentimentality and this sort of thing. He really wanted to distance himself from personal relationships. Even he later on tells people that he doesn't have any friends, only acquaintances. He has this absolute sort of idea that the artist is somebody who is outside of society, who looks at it from a neutral place. And that's something he strives to. And these poems, if you've read them or when you read them, absolutely prove that he is a very sentimental person, I think. I don't know how you feel by reading them, but anyway, sorry, we're talking about his musical history. So he's very interested in early music, in Elizabethan music. I say Elizabethan as opposed to Renaissance because in particular English Renaissance music. He thinks that Dowland is amazing. What does he say about Dowland?
Could I ask for a clarification? A lot of us are untutored in these distinctions between Elizabethan and other forms of music. How do you understand that distinction?
Oh, Elizabethan. I just mean in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, therefore English.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, I know because sometimes I hear people talking about America and they're talking about buildings as looking Victorian, and I'm thinking, but it can't be Victorian, surely. Yeah. So no, so just, so Elizabeth reigned from 1558 to 1603. So this is the end of, in music, in art history, what we call the Renaissance. After that, after her death, we move on to a different era, which we call Baroque in music. The Renaissance music is absolutely wonderful. The Renaissance ideas going on with the Renaissance art movement are about emotion as opposed to the medieval that went before it, where things tend to be very stylized. And people are not valued for having a personality so much in the medieval era because the great works of art are all about devotion. Religion is massive, and at the sort of start of the Renaissance, the idea of a more fluid way of looking at things and having more humans could be more valued seemed to be the idea of it. So we get quite emotional songs, such as Dowland was a great lute song writer. He wrote songs that would be sung accompanied by the lute. And Joyce loved him. What's his favorite Dowland songs? Yeah, I can't read my own notes. It's a problem.
That's why I had to go switch everything to the computer. I had the same problem.
Weep You No More, Sad Fountains, I think, is Joyce's favorite Dowland song. And he has a lot of references in his works to the music of the Elizabethans. It makes it clear that he was familiar with it. This is from a portrait of the artist, a little clip in it. He says, "Then he saw himself sitting at the old piano, striking chords softly from its speckled keys and singing amid the talk which had arisen again in the room, Tahoe leaned beside the mantelpiece, a dainty song of the Elizabethans, a sad and sweet loth to depart, the victory chant of Agincourt and the happy hour of Greensleeves." So he just, and there's a lot. I mean, in Joyce's works, there are a lot of references to music. And looking at this early time, Elizabethan music, Joyce wants to play the lute, which would be a fairly reasonable thing to want to do right now. But in 1904, that was very difficult. So there's this wonderful correspondence between Joyce and Dolmesh, Arnold Dolmesh.
This is wonderful. I love this.
You looked it up. And Dolmesh is, he's a really huge figure in the early music movement. So for this is probably something that not everybody knows about. So to explain, there's a revival at the beginning of the 20th century. In a way, there's a revival where, aside from kind of almost up until then, musical instruments and styles have been going always through a notion of kind of progress towards a future. So we start off with very early keyboard instruments, and then we think, oh, we want them to sound bigger. We want them to sustain more. So technology advances, and we move, for example, from the harpsichord to things which are more like the piano. And the piano has certain, different sound to it, and it suits our purposes more. And what we don't do then, although they would run parallel to each other for a while, but eventually the harpsichord sort of dies out, and we don't then think, oh, but we should keep the old ones going. We're not so interested in history. I mean, this happens in
That's
a
very
lot
interesting.
it's going on in a lot of different art forms, and just not even art, just culturally. We're not so interested in history until then there's a revival. Go on, you've got a question?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, when I did do music, you could see this on a smaller scale, right? There would be all this concurrently. There would be all this drive towards more futuristic synthesizers and things like that. But then everything homogenized sound that people started to want to find very odd concept things that time forgot, even broken electronics, and starting to incorporate it into their music. So they sort of have this. So you have people using antiquated electronic instruments making modern music, and I don't know if we ever saw that with sort of revival of harpsichord or any other sorts of things that get cycled back around like we do in sort of contemporary modern music.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the contemporary music, you've got a new dimension to that, which is memory, because these things are really literally in people's memory. So it's like bringing up something from your childhood to get the old Moog out.
Yes, yes, nostalgia, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas at this time, we don't have such a move to nostalgia because there's not in living memory these instruments. What there is widespread around is a move for nationalism, for rediscovering national identity at this time. And so, for example, in Hungary, they would be using old folk instruments in modern classical compositions in order to give more of a feeling of that. But I don't think the early music is really about nationalism. I think it's an international thing. Dolmetsch was extremely international. I was trying to work out where he's from. He was born in France of Bohemian parents, and then he worked all over the place and settled in England, but kept moving. He was in America as well. Yeah, it's a lot of movement in it. But he was reviving early instruments. He made a lute in 1893, and in fact, it's in a museum not very far from where I am now in southeast London, called the Horniman Museum. Is this lute he made? And he also had been working with Yeats, another Irish poet that Joyce would have known. Yeah.
Love him so much. I thought about doing a recording of Rosa Alchema last night, but I was like, it's pretty late. I don't think I'm going to make it through this.
Then I give you an idea for it, because Dolmetsch had made a psaltery, it says ancient instrument, for Yeats. And during 1901 to 1902, Yeats, Dolmetsch, and Florence Farr had been reviving this practice of reciting poetry to an instrumental accompaniment. So poetry would have been very much recited in, ancient times. For example, it's mentioned in Beowulf, while somebody would play the harp or another instrument.
I love that so much. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in America, there was a period where like the popularization of beat poetry became a very big thing, and it kind of became it sort of became a satire of itself, where people became very excessive with it. So the idea of marrying poetry and live performance with instruments or whatever seemed to be, I don't know, a reach. It kind of seems cheesy or something like that, but I don't know, like they are such natural and comfortable bedfellows. There's got to be a tasteful way, like the way that you're doing it, for there to be a real revival of it in America. And I don't know if you see the same sort of flourishing that's going on in the UK with this right now, or if it's just kind of you doing your own thing.
In terms of people setting works, I'm not a huge amount of it going on. I don't think. A couple of people have set some Dylan Thomas recently. I think things do happen, but yeah, not so much, I guess.
So this is a tragedy that these art forms have been separated, is essentially what I'm trying to say here. They're unnecessarily bifurcated into just pure recitation and then musical performance on the other hand over here. And it's strange to me why we don't more often get them together. I don't know if you have any sort of theories on that, or if you have any emotional response to that. Do you feel like we've lost something in that process?
I guess the process going towards it might be in terms of people polarizing their activities more, because in the past people tended to do quite a few different things, whereas now we tend to be really go down the sort of tunnel in a way of becoming an expert at one thing and
Right.
feeling that we don't know enough about something else in order to do it. So I suppose not every poet feels that they could use music, but there is I suppose in a sense rap is doing that, isn't it? It's taking
Yes, it
music
is. It is.
poems
It's really wonderful in that way.
and,
So maybe that's where this tradition ultimately ends up. But I that's a little bit of a digression. So let's go back to what you were saying before about Yeats and this common character in Yeats and Joyce's life.
Yes, let's find Dolmetsch again. What's the funny thing is that the most significant date that everybody knows about James Joyce is Bloomsday, which is the 16th of June, and the first Bloomsday was the 16th of June 1904, which is when Joyce walked out with his later, much later, to-be wife Nora Barnacle for the first time. I mean, they were together from then, the rest of their lives, but they didn't get married for many years, which doesn't sound very exciting now, but in 1904 that was scandalous. So on the same day, Joyce writes to the secretary of the London Academy of Music. I've got that down from somewhere. It's probably the Royal Academy of Music. Sir, I shall be much obliged if you'll send me the address of Mr. Arnold Dolmetsch, the musician and instrument maker. I have looked in the London Directory and elsewhere, but have not been able to find it. It's just amazing that this was written on the 16th of June, 1904. What he wants to do and what he says to his friend Gogati, he says, my idea for July and August is this: to get Dolmetsch to make me a lute and to coast the south of England from Falmouth to Margate singing old songs. That's in the 3rd of June, 1904. Where I have a little giggle at Joyce is because the idea of somebody in England getting a letter on the 3rd of June and making you a lute and then you learning to play it so that you can then go on tour in July. It's
well, yeah, maybe speak. Yeah. Well, because there's the Radiohead song, "Anyone Can Play Guitar." This does not hold for the lute. It's a particularly difficult instrument to play.
It's fairly challenging to play it well. But then you could say that about the guitar. To play it really well is challenging. Plies. And he says, "Dear sir, lutes are extremely rare. I have not heard of any for sale for years. You should read my articles on this subject in the Connoisseur for April and May. I have made one lute, which is the one I mentioned in the Horniman Museum, some years ago, but it is doubtful whether I shall make any others. It would certainly be very expensive. And I could hardly say when it would be finished. The lute is moreover extremely difficult to play, and it would be very troublesome to keep in order." And then he suggests that instead Joyce gets a piano or a spinet. I mean, I can't imagine that really being a very sensible idea, to go on tour with a piano instead. Goes fairly easily. Oh, and he doesn't reply until the 17th of July. Anyway, it's doomed. And Joyce never gets his lute, and there he gets a guitar instead. I mean, because lutes, as Dolmetsch says, they're not readily available there. But it's this that prevents this set of poems really from becoming what they might have been, because his plan doesn't work out, and he doesn't get his lute, and he can't go on tour with it. At which point, I suppose he might have set the poems himself, but instead he learns to play guitar, and I can't think where his guitar is, but there's recordings of it. Yeah.
So if I can ask this question, I hadn't really thought about what, how Joyce intended for these to be set, why he was fixated with the lute. Like, I didn't know when he went looking for the lute if that was just like, oh, it was just in vogue, or if there was something about these poems that had to be set to that particular instrument, or what the lute meant to him, or if there was some sort of did he see that the nationalistic significance of a lute or its connection to an era, or
No,
what did the
there's no nationalistic significance.
well, I'm just kind of curious, why was the lute important to him?
Because he loved Elizabethan lyric, because he loved Dowland, because he was a tenor, and these are fabulous songs to sing if you're a tenor. Apparently, he went to the National Library in Dublin and he copied out every Dowland song he could find. It's what he was into.
And I'm sorry, Darland. Who is Darland, or
Dowland.
What is Darland?
Dowland is a composer in the late 16th century. Who wrote a lot of lute songs. Yeah.
Okay. So this whole puzzle is coming together for me now. Okay, it all makes sense. Okay.
Yes, keep asking questions. Yes, so Dowland is very, very famous. He's sort of the epitome, in a way, of the lute song.
He was a Elizabethan lute rock star. Got it.
Yes, yeah, and rock stars would sympathize because they tend to be kind of whiny songs about how she doesn't love him and he wants to die. But they are exquisite. They really are exquisite.
Well, this is an interesting question. I liked how you started off this conversation saying, like, the poet sort of hovers above, that wasn't your word, I think that's my interpretation, sort of hovers above society, the universe, whatever, is tapped into some other spiritual realm, and therefore can interpret this massive dream that we're all living in, right? I think a lot of philosophers think they can do this too. And this seems to run paradoxical to the content of chamber music, and because it is so sensual. So I don't know if you can speak to this dimension of Joyce's life, what was going on with him romantically, if he was merely putting sort of a romantic relationship into verse, or if it indicates a profound loneliness and longingness, as much as he felt himself to be above it all and tapped into some sort of higher reality that we couldn't possibly comprehend, he still had these very human needs that were going unrequited. Can you say anything about that emotional dimension and that paradox that's going on within chamber music?
Yeah, and I think the paradox within Joyce, I think he is being strongly pulled in both directions. The direction of the fact that, yes, he's a human and he loves people, and he certainly has, during the time of this these poems being written, a lot of things happens in his life, the biggest of which being that his mother dies. And, he falls in love. But before this big love that will be the main love in his life, I'm sure he has encounters also with women, and he has a kind of guilt about it. I think all of these emotions. He's almost angry, you could say, about it. But just reading something he wrote in a letter, he said, "What the juice is there in music, and above all in singing, that moves us so deeply." As in, you could interpret that, what the juice is there, he's almost frustrated by it. He almost doesn't publish these poems. A kind of crisis about it. They get published in 1907. And the biggest input into that is his brother Stanislaus. And so he almost cancels the publication. He says all that kind of thing is false. And then a couple of years later, he sends a parchment copy to to Nora Barnacle with their initials intertwined on it. So there's this fight, I think, always within him between, I want to be this cold, cool, observant person, and yet I am human. And these poems are very human. There's little moments where it breaks out of it, and it doesn't always almost work, because they're quite, you said, there's a lot of natural imagery in the poems, and a lot of emotion pastoral in them. Were you saying that? Yeah, it's very pastoral. I think it's influenced by the Elizabethan sort of things. They're quite coy in a lot of ways, and then he'll sometimes have one that's one that sort of strikes outside of that, and what's the one about Capuchin? Can't think of the song, but where is the poem? What counsel has the hooded moon put in thy heart, my shyly sweet, of love in ancient plenilune, glory and stars beneath his feet, a sage that is but kith and kin with the comedian Capuchin. So Capuchin was this comedian at the time who had a really big face, and he's likening this to the moon. So he's Joyce is sort of mocking presumably a girl who, what counsel is the hooded moon put in thy heart, my shyly sweet of love and ancient. He's mocking her for finding the moon romantic, and he's saying a sage that is but kith and kin with the comedian Capuchin. So he's saying, you know, this is nonsense. It's a moon. You know, it's not anything romantic. You know, it's as romantic as this comedian. But, you know, in the next poem, he will be being totally romantic about something, not necessarily the moon. There's a lot of contradiction, I think, in the if you would think of it as a message he's trying to bring about, then it's quite a lot of contradiction. He's a young man, you know, yeah. he's finding his way in these poems, which I think is amazing. That we
Does he ever find his way? Does he ever find his way?
I think he experiments with style throughout his whole career. That's a very important thing. He's always looking at words in a very interesting way. Yeah, but this is the sort of initial explorations. We get a lot of different influences. We get the Elizabethans in here a lot, but we get the sort of Irish folk kind of influence into it as well. And then we get romantic poets like Yeats, which, you know, his kind of heritage in that way.
So what can I ask you to make an estimation of these poems sans music, right? So, how do you think that they stand without being set to music? What's your estimation of them, and then we'll kind of go from there. Do you think they're beautiful in their own right?
I don't know, because I've never heard them without music. Is the answer.
right, because as soon as you started reading them, the music started coming to you, right?
Yeah.
Could you maybe, then if that's the case, right, if you can't make that judgment because they've always been paired, can you maybe tell us a little bit about the process of how you began? Like, so you read the poem and then you start hearing this music in your mind, and then can you just walk us through your process and which poems? We were talking off camera earlier. You were telling me that you had not done them all. You've done a subset of them, and maybe you can talk about which ones you've done. And I'm sure there's a different.
I've done them all.
Oh no, you have done them all. Okay, all right, I was mistaken.
Yeah.
So can you? I can't imagine that the process is the same for all of them, or maybe it is. Maybe there's like 4 different types of ways at arriving at the finished art product that you created. Can you maybe describe your artistic process in relation to these poems?
Yeah. So I think the first thing would be that I cannot remember now. It will have been an early one, as in towards the beginning of the book, that I would have started setting. And that would be one way of looking at it. You read a poem, the rhythm of Joyce's language is always, in anything he writes, amazing and interesting. And he is a musician, and that is coming through him in the rhythm of the words. Obviously, there's no pitch or anything else. I had a challenge with the poems as a whole, trying to find the instrumentation for the work. I knew that because he says he would like somebody who knows Old English music, such as he liked, to set it. And that hadn't been done. So that was an interesting thing. But I found that out later. It had already become a musical project for me. But then finding out his interest in the lute and the Elizabethan style made me think very much. It's inevitable that a tenor would sing. because Joyce was a tenor, it's inevitable that a lute would be in it. For 36 poems, I wanted a larger ensemble than just tenor and lute. It needed a female singer because some of the poems are from the point of view of the women as well.
That's right.
So, so in comes the soprano. And then I wanted a few more instruments, so I toyed for a while, and in the end they got I've got a broken consort, which is a consort is an instrumental ensemble from the Renaissance, let's say, and you could have a consort of viols, for example, and 3 viols. A viol is a sort of predecessor to a cello, to the violin family. They come in different sizes, but they're held in a similar way to a cello. They've got 6 strings. Or 7, and so I've got a bass viol, which would have been a very common instrument at the time. I play it as well, although I've always sung in the works and got someone else to play viol. And then I toyed with the melodic instrument, and in the end I went for a Renaissance flute, which is a wooden flute, which is it's the Renaissance version, but it looks it's quite equivalent to using a sort of Irish flute as well. And there's quite a few, what I feel in it, there's a lot of references to the wind during the poems, so I wanted a woodwind instrument. And there's some things which feel quite military in a way. This one here, bright cap and streamers, he sings in the hollow. So that bright cap and streamers, there's something, in troop at his shoulder. I wanted to put something in that had that kind of sort of feel of the military, which for me a wood flute did, sort of a whistle kind of thing. Yeah. So approaching them, sometimes I would literally I think in all cases, an authentic composition from me feels like through me. You read and, you just write it down. You don't feel, you don't think. It's not a thought process. But then once you set up constraints, such as the instruments, then you have to fit things within those constraints. Early instruments, they are quite fussy about which keys they like to play in, for example. They don't like lots of sharps and flats. So that kind of constrains a little bit the keys. And then after a while that you are writing a set of 36 songs, and therefore it wants to be balanced. Coming up with interest throughout it was not in any way difficult. Joyce writes with so many different styles himself that if you just write the right music, this was always my aim was always to write the right music for the poem, that it would be right. Obviously, that's my definition of what right is. And when I say something like the music's coming through me, obviously it is being filtered by my knowledge and my experience and my ability. But beyond that, it isn't a sort of, it's not a kind of process, artificial kind of process of, oh, I should do this in this situation. It's not like that. It's not coming through the thoughts so much. But because he's moving his rhythms and things all of the time, the structure of them, then the variety it's there. There's no danger of it not being a lot of variety. Just looking at, I could look at a few examples. Or where do you want to go? Where do you want to go next with this conversation?
I mean, there's so many angles that I want to go in. I mean, you know what I'm thinking about doing? I think maybe what we should do is just put all the composition. We should just have a little concert at the end, and we should just have them all that people can listen to continuously, because I don't really want to break up the flow of the conversation that we're having right now. So I want to keep asking you some more questions. So in the scoring of the poems, does the question arise to you, how authentic am I being to Joyce's wishes? How authentic I am being to myself? How much daylight? How much interpretive daylight is there between the two of us? Do you feel like you're responsible for Joyce's vision in any sort of way, or where do you shake out on?
Yes, it's so nice setting the words of somebody who is dead, because they can't come and say, "Oh, I don't like it," actually.
Right.
So that's a bit relaxing. In other ways, it's an awful shame because it would be nice to know what you would think of it. Yeah, how much do I feel? I feel that I've kept his wishes. This is a fun project because you're looking at somebody who is writing at the beginning of the 20th century in Ireland, who is very interested in, obviously, the Renaissance angle to it, but he is writing. He is not writing in the 16th century. So I've got so many things I can look at, really, in terms of, sometimes one 16, How Cool Is the Valley Now, I think I sort of
I love that one.
almost deliberately.
I love that one so much. Can you read it? Can you read it? I just love it.
Oh, cool is the valley now, and there, love, will we go. For many a choir is singing now, where love did sometime go. And hear you not the thrushes calling us away. Oh, cool and pleasant is the valley, and there, love, will we stay.
Yeah, it's so good.
It's a lot in that little poem, isn't there?
Yeah.
It takes a long time. The setting of this one it's a 6-part. It's in fairly strict 6-part counterpoint, and it's very slow. So it's probably one of my most complex settings. I guess it's one of his most complex ones, and it's the turning point because as an arc. There isn't a story in these poems, but there is definitely an arc going towards, everything is leading towards basically him asking the girl out, which he does in poem 14, and in poem 15 she responds. And it's almost like they just kind of come together and then they just kind of miss. And everything from this poem, 16, How Cool Is the Valley, it's where, just when she's kind of saying yes. Does she say yes? She kind of does. She says, from dewy dreams my soul arise. It's getting quite romantic, and then you turn the page and cool is the valley now. So it's not saying pleasant is the valley. This is kind of biblical, actually, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, even I can spot that song. And but it's cool. And then number 17, yes, 17, the next one is perhaps my favorite, actually, because I think it's devastating. I can sing that to you, actually, if you like, because it's just an a cappella one.
Yeah, I would love it.
Like that. It's short. Because your voice was at my side, I gave him pain. Because within my hand I held your hand again. There is no word, nor any sign can make amend. He is a stranger to me now, friend. Oh, not my greatest rendition, but you get the gist.
No. So why why is that one your favorite? It's hard to say it's your favorite, right?
It's hard to say a favorite, isn't it? Because it's such a succinct way. It destroys it. All of what's sort of been built up, I feel, is just destroyed here. Because your voice was at my side, I gave him pain. Because I was thinking about someone else, and I held their hand. There's now nothing I can do. This seems to me. I think just from my long engagement with these poems, I definitely have an idea of Joyce in my head, which is, who knows if it resembles the truth, but I think he is quite an extreme person. And so in other times when you thought about your ex-lover, it didn't necessarily tear everything apart, but I think it's such a kind of romantic thing that he just allows this to devastate. And the way of saying that, he is a stranger to me now who was my friend, it's not brutal. It's very It's very subtle. I feel, yeah, the poem. So I gave it a very sort of little tiny a cappella song. Having just had this massive one for "O Cool Is the Valley Now," and the poems are exactly the same length in terms of lines, but this one just I gave it. I've written here 38 seconds because I'm that sort of obsessive composer who's working everything out. That it would have such a little tiny amount of time to do it, and then when you go on to 18, you get a really incongruous poem with that. It seems "Oh sweetheart, hear your lover's tale. Oh sweetheart, hear your lover's tale. And a man shall have sorrow when friends him fail." I gave it quite a sort of silly, ploddy one because it just seems like everything's fallen apart, and he hasn't noticed. It's about friends being untrue, but it's kind of a silly poem. I can say that, I feel.
Well, something I'm deeply intrigued by, right, is that you have spent countless hours trying to get inside the psyche of Joyce via music and these poems in a way that probably no one else really has. And so I guess I'm kind of curious if you may just, what insights you may have into his personality that maybe others have overlooked, or if other people have picked it out in some ways, how it's manifesting itself in this collection of poems. Because I know when I spend a lot of time with a thinker and really studying their work line by line, I get a richness and a depth to the understanding of who they were as a real person that I never had before. You must feel like you know this man. And I'm just kind of curious, what truth about him could you maybe communicate to a larger audience that, just a casual reader of Joyce may not understand?
Ooh, I don't know, because I don't know what other
question,
people
right?
think. How I could, I don't know which of my feelings would be unique.
Well, let's just go with what you think. I mean, I don't know. Like sometimes, like I was telling you off camera earlier, and I think people know this who consume a lot of the materials that we make for Noetic. I think it's no secret that most of my research, formal research, is into the work of Soren Kierkegaard. And sometimes it's hard to make the distinction about where he ends and I begin in my thinking. So much so that I have a friend who calls me Lukaguard. And I sort of resent it because I like to be my own person. But I understand this sense of there kind of being a mind meld when you work very closely with something of this nature. Can you speak to that phenomena or experience? Do you know what I'm talking about? Did you have this experience working with Joyce?
I guess you do feel that you get to know these people, and I guess you have, in your own head, then you have a little relationship with them. I don't know how you feel about Soren. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I would have liked Joyce.
Really? Why is that?
Because his very kind of inconsistencies. I think he would have been quite an arrogant intellectual in some ways. And I guess one of the things I like about these poems is how they expose the side of him that he fought to hide, and they are inconsistent in a way that written quite soon afterwards Dubliners isn't so much. He was a bitter person in many ways. I know about the publishing of Dubliners, he sort of said, it should be published online, and these people, they need to know what they're like. He's not kind. But really just looking at the poetry as inspiration from my view on him, rather than getting other people's opinions, and looking outside of it. It's exquisite. There's absolutely no doubt that he was a total genius with words. And you get his hopes and fears in it, particularly your favorite, which is the last one, isn't it? This one I put to silence, actually. I feel that the music, my work ends quite devastatingly, as do the poems. And musically, my soprano, she leaves it in 34 with Sleep Now, oh you unquiet heart, with a very repetitive song. And she sort of ends catatonic. She's trying to get to sleep and she can't. Yeah, she has a sort of Lady Macbeth trying to get her hands clean kind of ending, with this repetitive thing going round and round and round. And then in 35, I let the instruments turn on the tenor. So there you go. Here's me being really mean. I'm just punishing Joyce now. This is not my whole story. It's not that I don't like him. But I guess there's some ways in which I'm teasing him a bit. I tease him with the music quite a bit. I'll talk about that at the beginning of them as well.
That's interesting. So the music, you're having there's a little bit of a dialogue going on in the interpretation that you're doing.
I guess so, yeah. I think because he's quite, he sort of strides out with these things of, oh, Domesh is going to make me a lute. And basically he's saying he wants to go and sing the old English songs, to show the English how it's done. He has quite a high opinion of his abilities. His abilities are obviously considerable. But he's terrified. At the end of these poems, he is absolutely terrified, and I feel for him. He's lost his mother. He has fallen out with Ireland. He exiles himself from Ireland, and everything he writes for the rest of his life. I mean, he leaves Ireland as a young man. The only work he wrote in Ireland is chamber music. Everything else is written from him being on mainland Europe. But he does not write about mainland Europe. He writes about Ireland. I think one of the contributing factors into that actually is that he has very poor eyesight. So I think he lives in his head quite a lot by not being able to engage so much. And he does eventually, I think, go blind in Paris. But I think as he's losing sight, literally, then he's going more into his own inner world and he's thinking about Ireland for the rest of it. So you've got a lot of water imagery in the last two poems. All day I hear the noise of waters making moan. Sad as the seabird is when going forth alone, he hears the winds cry, to the waters monotone. I had to say tone because it's alone. And for this, I basically gave all of the instruments, they get to attack him in a very rhythmical way. They're sort of screeching. It's very difficult to make horrible sounds from these lovely little Renaissance instruments.
Well, if you gave them to me, I'm sure I'd be an expert at that.
The lute is such a sweet sound. It's very light. But they're sort of, they're kind of making a stabbing. He's like, leaving Ireland. Yeah.
So you did some Renaissance Penderecki stuff.
Oh yeah, there's extended techniques because you're looking at as I said, the early 20th century poet looking at the Renaissance. But I also existed this, of course, writing in 2012 to 2013. And so all of those things do get to play in this. So we've got the extended kind of techniques, and flutes are wonderful for this. They can make all kinds of wind blowing noises and gurgling noises. And so they sort of go on the attack whilst he is basically kind of shouting. He's sort of screaming, the last one. And then out of all of that noise, and there's a huge noise, then the tenor just speaks the last poem, and it's totally devastating. And for me, this poem is about exile. Shall I say the last poem? Do you want to say the last poem?
Yes, please go for it.
Okay, this is a little bit longer, and it's kind of well out in a way of the rest of the poems in chamber music. This one really stands out where you feel it could be later. So if you imagine, he's had a fight and then he leaves Ireland. Actually, he leaves in a bad way. And there's the water, I feel, is because you do have to take a boat. And I think he's quite afraid of leaving. I hear an army charging upon the land, and the thunder of horses plunging foam about their knees. Arrogant in black armor behind them stand, disdaining the reins with fluttering whips, the charioteers. They cry unto the night their battle name. I moan in sleep where I hear afar their whirling laughter. They cleave the gloom of dreams, a blinding flame, clanging upon the heart as upon an anvil. They come shaking in triumph, their long green hair. They come out of the sea and run shouting by the shore. My heart, have you no wisdom thus to despair? My love, my love, my love, why have you left me alone? It's hard not to cry at the end of this one, because when you've gone through the hour-long performance of it, and then you just have this person saying at the end, why have you left me alone? It's terrifying. He's so scared, and I'm scared with him. And he's going to leave home, and he's lost his mum, and he is going to go and try and make it somewhere else that he doesn't speak the language. He's terrified. And that's what I feel this poem is about. We don't get to know actually when all of these were written, so I wouldn't know exactly.
Yeah, I think they'll sort of kind of remain enigmatic a little bit. From what I understand is that I believe the last three were sort of added on later. I don't know if you know anything about that and what the significance of it is, because there seems to be somewhat of a departure, especially with I Hear an Army Now. But that's just what I've heard. I don't really know.
I mean, with I Hear an Army Now, there's nothing particularly about the sort of Elizabethan kind of imagery about it, is there? And we get these other things that don't usually happen. They come shaking in triumph, their long green hair. They come out of the sea and run shouting by the shore. I mean, this is a dream.
Yeah, but I'm tempted to do some dream interpretation. I want this green hair. Who this could possibly symbolize.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's just a kind of beast. Well, the long green hair is I sort of feel seaweed because we're running around by the shore, but in a kind of sea creature kind of terrifying way.
Right.
But it's certainly monsters in the darkness, I guess. This clanging upon the heart as upon an anvil. It's terrifying poem, isn't it?
It is. Well, so I think what we'll do. So I wanted to sort of get. I have some other sessions here that I have to get ready for and have some lunch as well. So I think what I want to do at this moment is that I want to give you a chance to let everyone to know about the multitude of projects that you're involved in and how they can support you in those endeavors. If they want to come out and see shows, if they want to contribute to your Patreon campaign about your new endeavors, or even if there's a way for people to kind of get these materials together in a more professional setting. So I just want to give you the floor to talk about those things. And then I think what I'll do is that I'll assemble a number of the recordings, the live recordings that you've made, so that people can have a little bit of a concert here at the end. So I'll just kind of let you tie a bow on this session here today.
Thank you very much. Yeah. It would be really nice to make a proper recording. This work has had 3 performances. I gave its first performance on the South Coast because that's what James wanted to do. And but it's not got a recording. There are some sort of YouTube clips which are live, and everything's always been a little bit rushed. So there is a page on my website, which is www.annatam.co.uk, called James Joyce, and if you are motivated to do so, then it would be very kind of you to donate towards making a recording of this. And in return, when it is done, I shall send it to you and your name will be in the booklet. That would be amazing. It would love to get a proper recording of this. It's all 36 poems with, the original desire, if you like, of instrumentation and style in it. Otherwise, if you're on my website, you'll see lots of other projects I'm involved with. I've got a duo which are working on Renaissance and medieval works called Wild Roses. And I'm also a folk singer, and I do lots of things. But yeah, you can have a look on the website.
Well, how can people see you in the near future? What are some of the performances that you have coming up?
Oh, I don't know. In the near future, I don't know. I'm really busy with freelance work, but and we're writing the album for Wild Roses at the moment and coming out, but it's probably going to be Christmas before we would do a tour, and then I don't know. Yeah, I didn't.
Okay.
Have a look on the performances page. I will put.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, well, just make sure to follow her on YouTube and subscribe to her channel.
YouTube and Facebook and all of these things are around.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much. This was a real first as far as the call-in sessions that we've ever done for Noetic to blend music like this, and so I think it's incredibly innovative on a number of levels. The fact that you've taken so much time and thought, put it into this, but the fact that we've gone and made this and tried to incorporate music into it. So I can't thank you enough for participating in what we've done today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's an amazing project.
And I've learned so much from you. I want you to know that if you ever want to come back and talk about music or the synthesis of music and poetry, the offer is always on the table. I enjoyed this immensely.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh,
so you just let me know, okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Download the app. Go check out Anna's website, annatam.co.uk, and check out her stuff on YouTube. And please support her projects. All right. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
The shy star goes forth in heaven, O maiden disconsolate. Here you amid the drowsy even, one who is singing by your gate. His song is softer than the dew, and he is come to visit you. Open no more in reverie, when he had eventide his calling, nor muse who made this singer be, about not my heart is falling. Know you by this the lovers chant, 'tis I that am your visitant. Lean out of the window, golden hair. I heard you sing a merry air. My book was closed, I read no more. Watching the fire dance sing a merry air. Lean out of the window, golden hair. I would in that sweet bosom be all sweet tints and fairies, where no rude wind might visit me because of sad austerities. I would in that sweet bosom be. I would be ever in that heart, oh soft and milk and soft entreater, where only peace might be my heart, austerities were all the sweeter, so I were ever in that heart. Who goes amid the greenwood with springtime all adorning her? Who goes amid the merry greenwood to make it merrier? Who passes in the sunlight by ways that no the night would fall? Who passes in the sweet sunlight with means so virginal? The ways of all the woodland gleam with a soft and golden fog. For who does all the sunny woodland carry so brave a tar? Oh, it is for my true love,